Welcome to In the Spotlight. I'm Abigail Pogrebin. My guest today is Miriam Udel. She is the Judith London Evans Director of the TAM Institute of Jewish Studies and Associate Professor of Yiddish Language, Literature, and Culture at Emory University, where she studies the Jewish encounter with modernity. Miriam was ordained in 2019 as part of the first cohort of the executive ordination track at Yeshivat Maharat. That's the first seminary for Orthodox women to be ordained as clergy. Miriam's new research looks to children's literature and culture as a powerful force for political formation and a resource for the intergenerational transmission of culture, values, and ideology. She spent last year in New York as the inaugural Robert Rifkin Senior Fellow at the Center for Jewish History, the Covenant Foundation Jewish Family Education Fellow, and the Emory College Kronos Fellow. That's a lot of fellowships. Miriam is the author of Honey on the Page, a treasury of Yiddish children's literature, and the book called Never Better, The Modern Jewish Picaresque, winner of the 2017 National Jewish Book Award in Modern Jewish Thought and Experience. Finally, we get to her most recent book, which is going to be the topic today. It's called Modern Jewish Worldmaking Through Yiddish Children's Literature. It is published by Princeton University Press, October 14th, 2025. Welcome, Miriam.
Thank you so much.
You are clearly a little bit accomplished in academia, and the book is really quite an achievement. It's also a beautiful cover. Let's just start with the word world making. Modern Jewish world making through Yiddish children's literature. What's world making?
Sure. So this is a term that comes to us both through the world of creative writing and the world of political science. And I have pulled it into Jewish studies because I think that it speaks to what actually happened with Yiddish children's literature in a way that nothing else really can. And here's what I mean by that. Children's literature has been used for nation building projects. You know, if you want your society to look a certain way, if you want to build up a sense of what it is to be an American or an Israeli or a Soviet citizen, then you want to go as quickly as possible to the next generation and embed your ideas about what that citizen looks like in the stories that you hand to them. And so in the 20th century, children's literature was recruited into all of these different nation-building projects. But in the case of Yiddish, there was no conventional nation to be built. There wasn't going to be a country with borders and with an army to defend them. So what the creators of Yiddish children's literature did was that instead of building a conventional nation, they used the stories that they told children to create symbolic worlds for those children to inhabit. And that's what I mean by world making.
And that would become kind of integral with their identity in a certain way.
Exactly.
That world, those stories.
The world, the stories, the kind of person and the kind of traits that they were trying to cultivate through those stories would all be integrated into the children who grew up reading these tales.
And before we go into some of the specifics there, even though I think our audience knows what Yiddish is, what is Yiddish? I mean, you rarely hear it defined. And then how come you became expert in it?
Yeah, I'm so grateful that you actually paused to ask, because I think one of the challenges and also opportunities of working with Yiddish today is that we have so much more nostalgia and affection for Yiddish than we do knowledge of what it is. So Yiddish is the fusion language of Eastern and Central European Jewry that branched off from Middle High German around the turn of the first millennium and moved eastward with the Jews who spoke it from the area that's now Germany, but wasn't then called Germany, to Poland, to Russia, to the Pale of Settlement. And then in the late 19th century and early 20th, really became a global language through Jewish migration. So when it gets written down, it's written in Hebrew characters, but it has vocabulary from Germanic languages, it has Slavic elements, it has a very small, very old stratum of Romance language elements, and then wherever its speakers have settled, it takes on a little bit of vocabulary from all of those places. So Yiddish today, depending on where it's being spoken, also incorporates English, Spanish, and modern Hebrew vocabulary.
And it's identified, I think, in many of our minds, partly through Shtisel.
That's right.
With the observant community. Can you just address that?
Absolutely. So there are really kind of two groups of people who use Yiddish very actively today. One is the numerically small but culturally mighty group of scholars, artists, culture makers who, for a variety of reasons, and I will come back to your question about how I got into it.
Yes, we're going there.
You know, we all went down this rabbit hole and we don't want to get out. And then Yiddish is also the spoken vernacular language for many Hasidic Jews today. The numbers are a little bit hard to pin down precisely, but somewhere between 500,000 and 750,000
wow.
seems probable. So, you know, that is not a small group. And then there are artists and culture makers within that community. And so now, thanks to the internet, there's a lot more interface and kind of mutual availability of the Yiddish culture being made between these communities.
So, Miriam, you really are maybe the expert in Yiddish children's literature. How did that happen?
So it was really a convergence of, I would say, three different things going on in my life. One is that I was teaching Yiddish language classes to my students, and I knew that children's literature had been part of my education in all the languages I had studied until Yiddish. So that was Spanish and Hebrew and German. And when I was studying Yiddish, we never read any children's literature. So I wondered, is there anything that I could offer to my second semester students that they would be able to tackle? Like, does it exist? Second, I was in the process of studying for the rabbinate at Yeshivat Maharat. And I was thinking a lot about
For those who don't know, it is the first seminary for Orthodox women to be ordained as clergy.
That's exactly right. And after I earned tenure at Emory in 2015, my gift to myself was to embark on
Another heavy duty.
Studying for the rabbinate. That's exactly right. And so as a rabbi, I was curious about questions of Jewish cultural transmission from generation to generation. And perhaps most importantly, in terms of my investment in all of this, I was a mother to two young children, and I was thinking about ways that I wanted to transmit visions of Jewish joy and wholeness and how this ancient culture travels with us into the modern world. And as a seeker in all of those ways, as a language teacher, as a rabbi, and as a mom, I found my way into Yiddish children's literature.
And how did you make your way through that territory? How does one start to research that and become as expert as you did? Like, can you talk a little bit about just your process and the resources?
So it's so simple that the true answer is almost a little bit embarrassing. Pretty much as soon as I asked the question, the really ignorant question, does Yiddish children's literature exist? I was bombarded by the answer, which is that not only does it exist, but most of it, almost 1,000 standalone books, have been digitized.
Wow.
And they were sitting there on the website of the Yiddish Book Center, kind of waiting for someone to come along and do something with them, which is not to say that I'm the very first scholar to go into this terrain. We have a really wonderful book that the late Naomi Prower-Kadar published in 2017 about the periodicals in Yiddish for children, but there really hasn't been a full-scale study, and there hasn't been much scholarly work at all in the English language about this whole rich corpus of Yiddish children's literature.
Wow. So I know it's a big question, but how would you say Yiddish children's stories are a window into the Jewish struggle of survival and adaptation in the modern world?
So you highlighted the theme of struggle. And I think something really important for us to know in a time of geopolitical tension, cresting anti-Semitism. You know, we talk about the idea that anti-Semitism is a giant that sleeps lightly and it's waking up. I think it's really important for us to remember that generations of Jews have been here before, and we have needed to teach our children about how to respond, how to confront these problems, and emerge on the other side with a sense of resilience and strength, and that strength is really rooted in Jewish knowledge and Jewish action, and being able to act as Jews from the place of our deepest values, and that those values include and are really based upon a sense of empathy and being able to take other people's perspectives and approach them with compassion. And all of that is baked into Yiddish children's literature, and I think it has so much to offer to Jewish communities today.
Your book opens with a question that I thought was haunting. What shall we tell the children? And it echoes the Passover command, tell it to your children. Why was that question so central for Jewish writers of Yiddish children's stories?
So our children are always with us in the intimate sphere, and they are learning from our choices, from the way that we speak, not only to them, but in front of them. And so at the most dire times in Jewish history, and also at the times that we think of as ordinary, we are transmitting messages about our values, about our fears, about our aspirations to our children. And what this literature does is it really foregrounds these questions in a very intentional way. So in 1943, a figure named Udel Mark, who's so fascinating, he's actually the subject of a new opera that's being performed in New York. He was a grammarian and a linguist, and he also wrote for children and for what we would now call young adults. And he was also an educational theorist. So he writes an essay in 1943, writing in New York, observing from afar the terrible events in Europe, the terrible events of the Holocaust. And he himself says, we need to take our children as the partners in our harsh fate, and use story and use the educational encounter to let our children know, our children in New York and in Los Angeles and in Montreal and Chicago and Buenos Aires, to let them know in real time what is happening to their cousins in Europe. We can't spare them, so we need to find age-appropriate ways of teaching them that focus on Jewish agency, the ability to act, and heroism, acts of heroism and bravery, no matter how small.
And you mentioned in the preface, because you just raised the Holocaust, that we're 3 generations out from the Shoah and the founding of the State of Israel. Why are those historical moments important in relation to Yiddish children's literature?
So these were really the largest events with which this literature had to grapple. And the thing that one of the things that I want to get across to readers today is we think of the Yiddish left of 100 years ago and 50 years ago as being all one thing. But it was really a spectrum of different ideas and different approaches to the world. And so there were certain things, certain ideas that were shared in common, but there was also a lot of variety. And based on people's political intuitions and commitments, they made sense of the ideas, they made sense of the events of the Holocaust, and they made sense of the events that led up to the founding of the State of Israel in different ways. And they processed those huge headlines in different ways, and they handed their children different kinds of stories. And so I want to take us back to that moment of ideological variety and internal disagreement, because I think that also has a lot to teach us in our moment where it really feels like
very
two
divisive.
Jews, three opinions.
One of the most beloved characters in Yiddish children's fiction is the doggy. Is it Leipzig?
Leipzig.
Leipzig. You call Leipzig leftist lassie. Leftist lassie. So he's a proletarian mutt who gets adopted by a Bronx family in the early 30s. Tell us about that lassie.
So this is a collection of 12 stories written by an author whose birth name was Gershon Einbinder, but he styled himself Chaver Paver, which means bosom buddy. And he publishes these 12 stories in 1935. So it's really the depths of the Great Depression. And he is probably depicting events of 1932 or so. And so Leipzig is a tale of adoption that starts when a family is too poor to keep a dog. They can barely afford to feed themselves. The husband is out of work. And so the mom takes this long subway ride with the dog in a basket all the way from Brooklyn up to the Bronx so that she can abandon the dog far away from home and be rid of him. But she leaves a note around his neck explaining the circumstances and hoping that some kind family will be able to adopt him. So that is the event at the start of these stories. And along comes Beryl, the sewing machine operator with sparkling black eyes and a heart of gold. And he sees this dog shivering in the rain on the subway platform. And he says, you know what? I'm going to make my kids really happy. I'm taking this dog home. And home means returning to an apartment with Mama Molly, a son named Mulik, and a daughter named Rifkele. And they take Leipzig into their home and into their hearts, and they go on all kinds of adventures with Leipzig the doggy standing up against government corruption and police brutality,
and
tyranny, and entering the world of kid-appropriate, non-violent protest.
So it's political.
It's political, and it's heartfelt, and it's a great time.
And just the idea that parents and teachers were kind of signing on for political messages. Was there any concern about it?
So that is really one of the most salient differences between most of, not all of, but most of this literature that I'm talking about in the book and our contemporary children's literature. We imagine childhood as a time of innocence and therefore a time of political neutrality. And I'm here to sound a wake-up call and say, there is no such thing. If you imagine childhood to be politically neutral, that may be your own privilege talking. That may be the insulation from political events that has been purchased for you by your wealth, by your social standing, by where you sit in the contemporary world, because childhood is political. There are children who cannot ignore political events, and those children need stories. And I would argue that in the America of today and in many other places, all of our children need stories about political action that are rooted in our bedrock values. So we have to be clear about what those are. And I think that for most of us, for most of your viewers, those values include compassion and empathy. And so let's tell stories to our children that focus on and teach those values.
Speaking of the political, you wanted me to make sure that the kind of feminist lens on this gets mentioned. Tell me about, like, where is the feminism in Yiddish children's literature, or how we look back on it?
So it's in two places, actually. It's in the stories themselves, and it's in the enterprise of paying attention, serious, scholarly attention even, to the world of children and the people who stayed closest to them, typically women. So one of the exciting things that we see happening in this literature is that over the course of its development, we see a shift from just focusing on stories with boy protagonists, stories set in the Cheder, which was the Jewish elementary school that was attended by boys in the home of the teacher, to a focus on girl protagonists. And our girl plots almost always center on the heroine not being where the adults expect her to be. Sometimes it's a crisis and she's lost and we have to go out and find her. And sometimes it's not a crisis at all. It's a joyful adventure. And these authors are imagining a world that is safe for girls to wander and venture forth in. So that's about the content of Yiddish children's literature. But the kind of meta process of paying serious attention to this literature is a process of expanding whose stories we count in our scholarly attention, and saying, oh, the world of girls, which was so close to the world of women, this is a world that we can also think about critically and take really seriously.
So you mentioned that you're a mother as well as a scholar. How did these stories kind of weave into your own parenting, sharing them with your kids, those conversations? How did they feed you?
So the single most commonly occurring theme in Yiddish children's literature is the fact that some people have more and other people have less, and all of us have an obligation to do something about it. And depending on the political views of a given author and a given publishing house, the idea of what we needed to do about it could be really different. So on one end of the spectrum, we have a real foregrounding of the very traditional value of tzedakah, or charitable giving. And on the other end of the spectrum, we have stories that are teaching kids about how you organize politically and take collective action, like the forest birds do when they want to spring the urban city birds from their cages. And so they organize a protest, right? And all of these different modes of thinking through this issue of what are our obligations, what is incumbent upon us to do to make a more fair world, not just in theory, but when we're walking down the street and we pass someone who's going hungry and it's right there in our faces. These stories really gave me a vocabulary and a set of images and approaches and storylines that I could share with my own children from a Jewish vantage point.
Great. So finally, Miriam, unfortunately we're out of time. How would you want people to use this book? Is it for the average Jew or any reader, or is it really, I mean, it is such a deep, kind of definitive canvas for the academic who wants to understand this incredible trove and rich resource that informs really, I think, Jewish history.
So I'm going to try to say it really simply.
Okay.
There are about 50 pages of notes to the book, And the notes are at the end, very much on purpose. So I have tried to write in an accessible way.
Which you have.
That is really powered by the energy and the vitality and the cleverness of the stories themselves. So I really want to invite everyone into this world through story, and I hope that the book is going to find the widest possible readership, and that it's something that different generations will find a way to share with each other on their own Jewish journeys.
Beautiful. Is there anything you want to say in Yiddish to the Yiddish speakers out there?
Me soll hanorben von mein Buch und seid gesund.
Beautiful. Miriam Udel, the book is Modern Jewish Worldmaking Through Yiddish Children's Literature. Thank you for this, and thank you for this conversation.
What a pleasure to be with you.
I'm Abigail Pogrebin for In the Spotlight. It's been good to be with you, and I'll see you next time.